Good evening, everybody. This is Brendan Baylott, and welcome to the Great Lakes Shipwreck Research Group. It's Wednesday night, and you know what that means. Another interview with an exciting person doing cool stuff on the Great Lakes. And this week, we've got a really great guest for you, a person who is really one of the leaders in underwater archaeology, not just on the Great Lakes, but really, I think, worldwide myself. So we're really excited to have Tamara Thomsen, our state underwater archaeologist from Wisconsin. Tammy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for agreeing to be on. All right. So we've got a good show for you tonight, guys. And I wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping first. First of all, thank you to everyone who's joined this group and made our community so successful. We recently had our 2,500th member.
Crazy.
Yeah, I had no idea there were that many people that were interested in shipwreck research. I mean, a lot of people are interested in the Titanic. A lot of people are interested in the Edmund Fitzgerald, and a lot of people are interested in sport diving. But I'm just surprised that so many people are interested in the ones that are still missing and locating them. So thank you, everybody, for joining. Next week, oh my gosh, we have quite a guest. For those of you who were on and watched last week, you saw that we are going to have Dave Trotter on the show. Dave is a legendary shipwreck hunter. I would say he is probably the most prolific shipwreck hunter on the Great Lakes, having found all the big ore boats on Lake Huron. And Dave is a wealth of just fascinating stories. He is one of the pioneers of Great Lakes shipwreck hunting and Great Lakes shipwreck research. And so what a privilege it'll be to have Dave Trotter on. Don't miss the show. You won't want to miss Dave Trotter. All right. A couple other things I want to talk about. Some really tragic news. There's, as you've seen, there's flooding all over the Midwest, particularly in the Midland, Michigan area right now. Our hearts go out to everybody out there who's, had their livelihood disrupted. But right here, on the Great Lakes, we've had a major tragedy. The Chicago Maritime Museum and downtown Chicago in general has had significant flooding. And the Chicago Maritime Museum, as most of you know, is right on a river, and its basement was flooded, and there was significant flooding there. Jim Jarecki, who was on their board, contacted me and told me that they really could use donations and help. So if you want to go to their website, it's chicagomaritimemuseum.org. They have a page there for donations, and also you can inquire about ways that you can help. If you're in the Chicagoland area and you want to support the Chicago Maritime Museum and help them out, go to their website and see what you can do. I strongly recommend it. They're a great organization and really a nice group of people who, really put their heart and soul into that museum. So support them if you can. All right. Well, let's get underway. So, Tammy, I think you and I first ran into each other at the Ghost Ships Festival. Oh, gosh, nigh on 20 years ago. And there you go. And I remember hearing that you and Keith were going to be our new underwater archaeologists. And I was like, wow, young people interested in this. I was stunned because, at Ghost Ships Festival, I went there, and at that time, I was the youngest person there, and I got to be in the mid 40s. I was still the youngest person there, and it started to get a little bit alarming. So it was really cool to see you guys there. And little did we know, that you would go on to really sort of revolutionize our underwater archaeology program and really put your stamp on it and nominate more wrecks to the National Register than any other state in the nation. And I'm sure than any other person and any other underwater archaeologist ever. So, it's just been you've been really a wonderful asset to our state and to our community. And what I always ask everybody, who's on the show is, did you ever, when you were young, was that something that you aspired to? How did you get involved in this? And tell us a little bit about your background, Tammy.
No, I had no idea. None at all. My parents vacationed in Marco Island, Florida. So I grew up in Indianapolis, and so the hub of Great Lakes maritime culture is there. No, just kidding. But my parents had vacationed in Marco Island, Florida, and we went down there quite a bit. And all through high school, I begged my father to uh, let us take scuba diving lessons, and he kept putting it off, next year, you know. And finally, I came to college, and it was offered as a class at the University of Wisconsin Madison here, and I tried to get in, and I tried to get in every year up until my junior year, when I finally was able to get a spot in the course. And I absolutely loved it. And my dad was so jealous that he signed up and took scuba classes too. And I got involved. I jumped in with both feet and started taking classes and meeting people and going diving every time that I could. And tried to grow the experiences that I had underwater as well. So it was one of those interesting things that came to me very late in life. You know, I was studying in graduate school to be a geneticist, so I wanted to work with sweet corn. And I found myself in a job market when I got out of graduate school where there was no job opportunities. So we were in a recession, and so I thought, well, I had worked my way up to instructor, and I had been teaching my way through graduate school to make some extra money teaching scuba. And I thought, well, you know what, I'll sit it out for a year or so and start sending out resumes and do the best that I can, and see what happens. And I never went back to genetics. I never went back to grad school, and scuba kind of took over my life. So I really had no idea about the shipwrecks. In fact, I had gone diving on a couple wrecks. I had one of those passes that Jerry Geyer sells in Milwaukee. They were for, you know, a seasonal pass, and I went out and I wreck dived there in the early 90s, and I scared the bejesus out of myself and thought I will never go back wreck diving again. But I really did want to combine science with diving. And so I was also trying to make a little bit of extra money while I was still sending out resumes and teaching scuba. So I took a job washing dishes in the geology and geophysics department at the university. And one of the professors there was studying mines, and she was studying all kinds of different biofilms, animals and bacteria that lived in flooded lead mines. And it was sort of a natural fit to combine my diving and my science and work for her. So I worked for her for a number of years. Her name was Jillian Banfield. It was an absolutely lovely job. I was out diving in caves and mines in southwestern part of the state, setting up experiments, collecting water samples every other day or every third day, as much diving as I could do and as much science experiments we could do in the field as well. There's some biofilms we're collecting. And then she won the MacArthur Genius Grant, the National Science Foundation's grant. They give out like $500,000 to scientists to do whatever they want to do, except pay their own salary. And so she'd moved the lab to Berkeley, California. And so I might be one of the few underwater archaeologists that has 2 papers in the Journal of Science. It's sort of the cup for scientists to have a publication there, and I have 2. And I didn't pursue continuing on with a PhD. So, you know, because we were working in mines, we were reporting a lot of our finds to the state archaeologist, John Broyhan. And when she in the lab left, I really didn't have a direction. But I still wanted to, I really liked working underwater. And so I started volunteering at the State Historical Society, and worked with Kathy and Russ Green, who were in the Maritime Preservation and Archaeology office at the time. and started volunteering as much as possible. And then I was given an opportunity to go work for NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. And I went to North Carolina to work on the USS Monitor. And I took 2 summers off, and I went out there and worked with the Navy and NOAA and a group called the Cambrian Foundation. And we were there when the engine was removed, and we did the preparation for the turret lift. So I spent 2 summers out there doing that, and that really got me to catch the bug for underwater archaeology. So sort of in the meantime, that picture you just flipped through, I ended up starting my own dive shop. So while I was teaching, the shop I was working for ended up closing. I ended up with a lot of students that were halfway through classes. And so they were coming over to my apartment every night and watching PADI videos, and I got a little out of control. And finally, my landlord came over and said, you know what, we're going to set you up with some friend of mine that has some retail property. And that's how I ended up with the dive shop. Totally not in preparation. I do still teach. In fact, I was up at the shop just before this interview, teaching a nitrox class. So it's still an ongoing commitment there. But there's we have 14 employees, and there's 8 different instructors that work for us. So it's more than just me that's involved with that operation. And my cousin came to work for me, and he's does police and fire. So now it's almost more of one of those family businesses, and everybody there is family. We're all there to pitch in. So it's kind of, dive shop by accident, scientific diving by accident. The selection for getting on the Monitor was by accident. In fact, I was in a bar in Las Vegas with a writer from England named Rosemary Lunn. She still writes quite a bit in the UK and European markets. And absolutely gorgeous women, blonde hair, perfectly dressed, perfect makeup. And I was having a drink with her in a bar, and these guys came up and said, well, would you like to go dive in the Monitor? And she didn't have the credentials, and she said, well, I can't. They were hitting on her, right? And they said, but my ugly stepsister over here can qualify for that. So that's actually how I ended up out in Hatteras for 2 summers and 3 missions working on the Monitor, was because of some guys trying to pick up Rosemary in a bar. So if you can go on to the next slide, Brendan. That was a picture of that you had gone previously. There you go. That's actually in Hatteras on the Monitor project. This is baby Tammy sitting in this is probably 1999, 2000, and I'm sitting in the NOAA Navy gas blending trailer. Blending gas for the next day. So, and this is, like I said, what really caught the bug for me for archaeology. So that's kind of how I started getting here. I volunteered for Kathy and Russ and done a couple of projects. They left and went up to the NOAA National Marine Sanctuary at Thunder Bay. And my boyfriend, Keith Meverden, was working for them. He was the 3rd person in the office when they left. And so we had some grant funding to work on photo mosaics of the Apostle Islands, the shipwrecks of the Apostles. And I had some experience working on photo mosaics. I'd worked for a professor. I had an odd job with a professor at Texas A&M University, and I'd done some mosaics of submerged caves for him. So I was hired into a project position at the Historical Society, and allowed to work there until the money ran out or until someone better came along. And I'm still there. So this is another photo from that Apostle Islands project in 2000. 1984. So, Keith ended up deployed a couple times during this, which left me alone or with an intern. And it was, out of the frying pan into the fire with a lot of it, learning how to manage the program and coordinate field seasons and meet grant obligations. And so there was an awful lot of learning, steep learning curve for me coming into it.
What a tremendous story, Tammy. I had no idea that you had a background in genetics. I just can't imagine how much better our sweet corn would have been.
Oh yeah. Maybe this was meant to be,
Very cool story. Very cool. And we really are so fortunate to have you here. Can you tell us a little bit about the program? So the state's Maritime Preservation and Archaeology program is kind of unique in the Great Lakes, and it really is a powerhouse program. I think it could be a model for a lot of other states. I know we have, a lot of things that the program does. Can you talk a little bit about the vision, the purpose, and some of the different types of ways you guys do that and fulfill that?
Yeah. So the Historical Society's vision is really to connect people through collecting, preserving, and sharing stories. And that really becomes the mission of our program. But our program really started following the passing of the Abandoned Shipwreck Act in 1987, and our program came to fruition in 1988. And from there, we have started looking at shipwrecks in a different light. So the Abandoned Shipwreck Act, of course, gave the title to these submerged cultural resources to the citizens of the state. And it became the responsibility of our program and our partners with DNR to manage the resource. Our program was funded at first and really into the mid 90s. And then our funding fell out. Our state funding fell out, and we went on to soft money around, I'd say 96 or 97. And we remained on soft money, so looking for grants and charitable donations to make it run up through 2017. And we were able to secure additional state funding then. So that pays for me and my coworker, Caitlin Zant, the other underwater archaeologist in the office. It's a picture of us to sit at our desks, which doesn't do the resources much good. So we're still under the responsibility to seek out that funding and to be able to do the projects that we do out on the lakes. So did you want me to go through what a regular field season looks like, or do you want to save that for a little later?
Yeah, let's talk about that. I know that and I particularly like those publications you guys put up. Every year there's this big, thick, really well-researched publication on a whole nother group of shipwrecks in Wisconsin waters. And I look forward to those every year. They're available on the state website, and I've bought every one of them. Why don't we talk a little about that?
Okay, so our program, again, is mostly grant funded, especially the research portion, and it's funded primarily through, so this is Woods Hole, so we'll skip that. We'll go back to the Caitlin one, I guess, now. So that's Titanic. So our program is mostly funded through University of Wisconsin Sea Grant Institute and through the Wisconsin Coastal Management Program grants, but we have received grants from a number of other places. And so each one of those is written and managed during the winter time. And then that provides us with a year or two of funding for field research. We're able to look at 3 to 4 shipwrecks a season, depending on what the funding is. And so we will go out, we'll do a preliminary look at the shipwreck. And then we will do a phase 2 archaeological survey. So we're going to lay a baseline down the center. the shipwreck is then divided into 10-foot sections, and we draw what we see. So it's a scaled drawing of what we see. And this is for the relatively shallow shipwrecks. We use this methodology really for shipwrecks 150 feet or shallower. The deeper ones, we're working with ROV. So we've used Tom Crossman of Crossman Consulting, and he has a multi-beam sonar attached, so we're able to do measurements and observations through that. So the methodology that we use for the deeper shipwrecks for these site reviews are a little different. And so then, because it is a public institution, we have a responsibility to share what it is that we learned with the public. And so we do an intensive historical research search. We write up the history, the service history of the vessel, and then we do an intensive site description of what is down there, including artifacts or construction details of the shipwreck. And then we'll make recommendations. So in some cases, we'll recommend that we seek funding for a buoy, that there should be some mitigation work, and that type of thing. All of that's written up then. And again, if the shipwreck will qualify for the National Register of Historic Places, we'll issue a form for that and put that in for review. But the research and the site descriptions and the photography and the site plan all goes into a field report, which is published at the end of every field season. So sometimes we have some leftover pieces that we don't get through in a whole year, and then it'll show up the next year. But we try to make it all available to everyone. So.
Very cool, Tammy. So one of the things that I recall that I was really interested in is the shallow wrecks off Rowley's Point. There was a really interesting story from about some ways that the community has become involved in finding shipwrecks and helping document them. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So Raleigh Point, for those that don't know, is just north of Two Rivers, and this is if you go back a slide, that's Susie Johnson. She's a retired bookkeeper from Two Rivers, and when she retired, she didn't have she said she hadn't experienced a lot of excitement in her life, so she took up power parachuting. So it sort of looks like a modified lawnmower with a canopy, and every day that she can, she gets up and she in the air and she flies along the beach at Raleigh Point. And what's absolutely fascinating about this is that she's doing these observations over this same area as many times as she can get up, and she starts noticing changes in the lake bottom. So as different storms pass, as the water level goes up and down, different shipwrecks are exposed, and she has reported to our office 8 unique finds on the beach. So this is the Major Anderson underneath her shoe. And this is one of the first shipwrecks that was reported to us. Her daughter is actually a ranger at Point Beach State Forest. And so she sent me this picture and said, yeah, my mom has taken up flying, and she thinks she sees things in the water. She thinks she sees shipwrecks. And well, that's shipwreck. And it had not been reported to us before. It may have been discovered by others. We don't know, but it was not in the catalog.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so it fit the description. We went out. We were able to get out there the same week that it was reported. Put a tape measure on it. It was 154 feet long, and it had a number of other features which allowed us to identify it as the Major Anderson. That would be the only shipwreck on the point that was of that length and with the other features. And so pretty cool wreck. It actually went ashore in the fires that caused the Great Chicago Fire and the Peshtigo Fire. These regional fires in October 1871 were kind of sweeping, and there was sweeping the area, and there was smoke that was out over the lake, and the ship was lost in the smoke and came aground on Raleigh Point to get stuck in the quicksand and never to be removed again. And then the next season, she reported this one. And if you can see that, she said, "I don't think it's a shipwreck. It's a square thing that I see in the water." And she sent this picture. And I said, "Do you remember where you saw it?" And she said, "Oh, it was on the point, and it was just north of where the Major Anderson was." I'm like, "Don't you have a GPS?" So we got our GPS, and and so now we're able to get a lot closer to the shipwrecks. But because it's a square thing, you probably guessed it, it's a scow schooner.
Wow.
And this one is the Scow Alaska. And so this is kind of a cool ship. It was owned by Tanners out of Chicago, or sorry, out of Milwaukee. One named Guido Pfister Hotel. So it's kind of got this cool tie to the regional history here. So that was another one. But I mean, just amazing. If you go to the next slide, this is us. We're out there. We actually had a survey project on the S.E. Baldwin, which is in 75 feet of water off of Raleigh Point. But the wind blew almost all week, and we had our volunteers there, and we could stay near shore. So we started hitting wreck after wreck after wreck and surveying them and knocking them off until the wind stopped while you get back out to the S.C. Baldwin. So this is Matt Schultz, and I believe it's Caitlin looking at the bow of the Alaska. So we hit, I think it was the Lookout, the Alaska, and LaSalle before the wind died up, and we could get back out to the S.C. Baldwin where we were supposed to have been. So, and so it's been very fortunate to work with people reporting these things from the communities. For her to do these observations and to be there looking at that same stretch for this many years has really allowed us to reach into the history of that particular point.
Wow, I mean, you're really fortunate to have people like that in the community that are doing that kind of reporting, and that give you that opportunity. I mean, here in Wisconsin, we don't have as many beach wrecks, I think, maybe as they do in Michigan, although we certainly have plenty of them, or shallow wrecks like that. And we don't have as many that we can see from space, I suppose, as they do over in Michigan because of the sandy, beaches on our shores. But what a cool story. So I know one of the other ones that you guys are really excited about, that a mutual friend of ours, Steve Radovan, has found, a wreck that always fascinated me for years. I always wanted to find it, but I didn't have a side scan sonar back then, and that's the Abaya.
Yeah. So Steve had been looking for the Abaya for a number of years, and just last summer, he came across it in one of his grids, and absolutely amazing. He put a drop camera on it. He's got a drop camera array that he has constructed. Put it down there, sent us some images. Ended up driving down to Madison to the office. I think I have a picture of that. It might be towards the end of the slides that I gave you. And he keep going all the way to the end there. There it is. And he said, "Yeah, I think it's the Abaya." So we were able to get one of our volunteers on a boat, and we got out there in September and put a tape on it. And it's sort of the wrecking of the ship fits the story, the damage to it. And so we then were able to secure some funding from the Hamilton Family Foundation. And this year we're going to be going back out to Abaya with Tom Crossman to look at it with a multi-beam sonar and with an ROV. And then we're going to go a little bit later on in the summer with Evan Kovacs from Marine Imaging Technologies. And we're going to try to create a photogrammetry model of the ship. This ship is pretty early pretty early sailing vessel in Wisconsin waters, and it was known to have brought the first locomotive to Wisconsin. So it was boxed up, brought here, reassembled in Milwaukee, and then and so that's kind of the significant history of our area that the ship brings. So working with the guys that are out there looking for shipwrecks has really been advantageous for us understanding really this whole timeline of history of our state. Every one of these shipwrecks as they're discovered allows us to share a little bit more of that story and sort of tweak or uncover these different aspects of our history.
So one of the things I know looking at this shipwreck, I mean, for at least 100 years, this thing sat in pitch black darkness down there because of the depth of the water. You know, you would have been, you wouldn't have seen your hand in front of your face down there. It would have been pitch black for most of the history of this wreck's existence down there. And honestly, for thousands of years, that for the whole most of Lake Michigan's history, that's how the water's been. But as you see on here, we've got all these quagga mussels.
Yep.
That have really cleared things up. And I suppose in some ways, maybe...
The ship, by the way, is in 250 feet of water. So, and this is ambient light that you're seeing.
That's amazing that it's that bright and that clear in 250 feet of water.
Mm-hmm.
So with something like this, Tammy, is this something that, sport divers will eventually visit, or, how does that usually work when the state has a really pristine find like this that's historically important?
Oh, yeah. So we do work with the shipwreck hunters. So this is an archaeological site. So the way that Wisconsin catalogs their sites protects them. Because they share it with us, we leave it up to the shipwreck hunter as to whether we can make the numbers publicly available. So if you are interested in going to visit this shipwreck, it's not mine to give the numbers out. We would allow Steve to decide whether he wanted to share them. So that's kind of been our policy, and that's also allowed other people to feel more comfortable about sharing numbers with us because they know we're not just going to open it up to anyone, that they have some control.
That's really a nice policy. So, if I find a shipwreck, I can have the state survey it and let them catalog its historical importance, but I don't have to worry about, hundreds of divers descending on it and maybe, collecting souvenirs.
If that's what you're worried about, we really make it at the discretion of the shipwreck hunter. So there's no sunshine law, that Freedom of Information Act that can force us to give up the numbers of the wrecks. But we do make as many of them available as possible, and a lot of guys want the notoriety, and so after a little bit of time, most of the shipwreck numbers are made publicly available.
Yeah, and I talked to Steve about this. He usually does eventually make them available. Yeah. His main goal is to see them really documented well. But one of the big concerns I know Steve has, I've got the same concern. Many of us do, who dived these wrecks back in the 1980s, and many of our viewers here were diving in the 60s and 70s even. And, back then, everybody kind of, had a different attitude about it. But, as we started to see these wrecks degrade, and as we started to see artifacts, removed from their environments, and nobody could tell what they were anymore, people started to catch on, right? That, maybe it's not such a good idea to take these things. And even after the law was passed, a lot of divers still were like, yeah, I'm still bringing my goodie bag. But nowadays, boy, I don't know anybody who takes anything from shipwrecks. However, there's so much damage that just happens even without intent, right? Can you talk a little bit about some of those issues, about the damage that we've seen to the wrecks?
Sure. So we're seeing, not as many artifacts going either. So, but I'm not the shipwreck police. So this is a shared responsibility resource, and we share that responsibility with DNR. So we work very closely with the conservation wardens. And every once in a while, we'll have a report of something gone missing, but it's very infrequently. So we have that going for us, and 35 years of education, public education has really taught, I think, the value of leaving things in place and making these shipwrecks fresh, like a new discovery, for the next person that goes and sees them. This image that you're showing is a 3D model of the SS Wisconsin. A few years ago, we received we were getting all kinds of reports from divers anecdotally that the Wisconsin, well, actually all the metal shipwrecks in Wisconsin are falling apart. And so that could be a number of things. It could be, maybe there's not as high of an attrition rate in the diving population. People aren't falling out and they're paying attention. Maybe we've educated them to look for damage, or maybe it's actually, falling apart. And so we thought we would try something to quantify how quickly these are falling apart and then try to figure out why. And so we had collected some data. We did a survey very early on the Wisconsin. It's in 130 feet of water. It was lost in 1929 off Kenosha, Wisconsin. And so we'd done a survey on this in 2006, and we had collected data in order to create a mosaic, a photo mosaic of it. That was what we were doing at the time. And I talked to a friend who was doing survey of glaciers, and he was doing a comparative analysis of glaciers. They were trying to go in and do photogrammetry day after day to try to predict when a glacial lake would break free and go down and flood a village. And so he was subtracting photogrammetry models and looking for this change. And I said to him, well, his name's Jason Gully. I was a professor at Michigan Tech. He's actually down in West Florida now. And I said, do you think you could do this on shipwrecks? And of course, it was like November or December. And he was like, yeah, sure. You got any data? And I didn't. So I sent him the 2006 data. It's top down looking. So you don't have the sides, but you can still do apples to apples comparison. So this is the 2015 model that was created when we went back out to do the comparison. If you go to the next slide, you can really see that side between 2006 and 2015 is cleaved off. Wow. So in the 2006 survey, you can see that the side has kind of buckled in and there's a crack that's being formed in the iron hull. But it's completely fallen away in that 2015. And so, how you've seen maps that show population density changes over time, and they've got all these colors and stuff in them. Mm-hmm. Well, if you go to the next one, we did that. We subtracted it. So you can actually now quantify how fast the shipwreck is falling apart and where it's falling apart. So if we went back out and we did this same survey, this was 9 years apart, but it was really to prove the methodology that we could go in and have a target shipwreck that we were worried about change and look at it every season, collecting data and creating a 3D model and then subtracting them and be able to show how quickly it's falling apart. Okay, so what's causing this to happen? Well, we started talking to some of our partners at UWC Grant. They work mostly with invasive species and water quality issues, and we're sort of this anomaly that deals with cultural resources. But there's an awful lot of people they fund that are working in the natural resources field. And we started asking them, why do you think this is falling apart? And the thing that they pointed to was the quagga mussels. So not only do the quagga mussels have weight, they have mass to them. And they, there's water that's flowing over the wreck site. It's going to create turbulence, which is going to have an effect on the structure of the metal. But they are also biological creatures, so they're respiring. So like you and I breathe, and they're putting off carbon dioxide, but they're putting it off into water. And when you measure with microprobes underneath the mussel beds, you can find that there's levels of carbonic acid, so low oxygen, and this is, and if you know, carbonic acid is in this acidic water, which is breaking down those metal shipwrecks. So because of these now, we're going to see rapid deterioration, unfortunately, of the metal shipwrecks. But so what can we do to preserve those? Not a whole lot, but we can make it a priority to go out and look at these metal shipwrecks and to really take the data while we can, because they're going to be deteriorating faster. Now, we haven't repeated this study, and like in science, you have to repeat things. So we would really like to look at the Milwaukee Car Ferry. We would really like to start looking at wooden shipwrecks to see how the quagga mussels are affecting them. Divers are there and they're brushing off the quagga mussels, off the vernon, and that's in 200 feet of water. There's a beautiful name board that's carved out of wood, and people brush it off. But every time you brush it off, they have these little tendrils that hold the quagga mussel there. And every time you brush it off, you brush a little piece of wood off of it. So you're damaging the shipwreck by doing that. They're just going to come back. We're seeing that fish are the native fish are starting to eat them, but not at a rate that's gonna control them. So our management really becomes where we spend our resources in studying these shipwrecks.
I know, Tammy, this is fascinating, by the way. I had no idea that this was done. I'm just kind of gobsmacked over this. This image here blows my mind. And then the difference. I'd heard that these metal wrecks were collapsing, but I'd never seen visual evidence like this.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about some of the diver impacts on some of the wrecks? Like the Robert C. Pringle, I know, is one that Steve Radovan and I were out on the boat together when we found it. And that's a wreck that's especially kind of dear to me.
Yeah, this is the Senator. So you want to move on to one of the, I think we've got maybe the next image is, that's Tom Crossman. There we go. This was taken last summer. Again, this was another project that was funded by the Hamilton Family Foundation. And we were able to go out. We looked at the video that was taken on your project, Brendan, and we were surprised. I mean, I think I was like the 6th or the 8th diver to get out there after your group had left.
Yeah.
And even comparing between that, which was a couple months later, what you were 2008, is that correct?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. And comparing from, when the initial divers were on there and the video that was published then to when I was out there. And if you go to the next slide, you can see this is a picture of the inside of the wheelhouse of the Pringle when I was there. And this was like a month after your project was done. Someone had tried to open the drawers of the map case and had collapsed one of the drawers. So they pulled the front right off of it. I mean, it's interesting to see what's inside, but now it's ruined. And you can see here, this is a pristine wheelhouse. Certainly you see the compass and you see the wheel. And if you go back a slide, this is what the wheelhouse looks like today. So, and this was 2019. So you can see the quagga mussels have come in. Whoever goes in there and fights their way through that door, all the divers, I guess, want to go inside the wheelhouse or swim through or something, but they're causing gouging to the doors now. And the spokes on the wheel you see are free of the quagga mussels. So those have been pulled off, and they're starting to get nibbled down to these little nubs that are on the wheel. And so I think just as divers, we need to stop kind of loving these shipwrecks to death. Just because you can go inside something doesn't mean you should fight your way in. You're going to ruin it. Think about the next diver. Think about the next generation of divers. Try to limit your impact. I want to know what's in the drawer too, but if that means defacing the drawer and ruining the look of the map case, I don't know that that's the right answer. So I just think that we all need to take sort of this larger responsibility in protecting the resources. When I said earlier that these were the property of the state, that's not this nebulous government agency. That's our responsibility to manage it. These are property of everyone that's a citizen of the state. So it's all of our collective responsibility to take care of these things. So it sounds kind of preachy, but we're seeing a lot of deterioration, and it's not just the responsibility of the of the invasive species.
Very good point. Well stated, I think, Tammy. You know, we used to have this old adage, a wreck found is a wreck lost, you know, back in the early days where, you know, they were hoping nobody would find any more wrecks. But then, you know, the attitude has changed that, you know, these are opportunities to learn. And so, and then, of course, we don't have to release the locations, you know, necessarily.
Yeah, and, you know, if a wreck is found too, that gives us the opportunity to be good stewards. You know, I mean, they need to be shared. If they're not shared, then you're not seeing this, you know, new pristine thing, and you're not finding the value in it, in protecting it and making it available for future generations. So I think that saying is wrong, in that it doesn't provide the opportunity for someone to develop this value in the stewardship of the resource.
Yeah, and of course, you know, in 50 years, a lot of these wrecks are not going to be like this. We'll lose the information that they contained.
Yeah.
So I think there is some urgency to find some of these now because of the quagga mussels. So that's why I bought a side scan sonar. not you know, not because I want to go out and thump my chest and say, look what I found, but because there's so many interesting stories to tell here. And one of them that I know I skipped over it a little bit, but it's the Senator. You know, this is the big automobile carrier off of Sheboygan in really deep water. And I remember I was out with Steve Radovan on the Pringle, and Paul Ehorn and Rob Pollich ran this over with their sonar. And we knew it was in really deep water. I honestly didn't think they'd find anything. But here it is with the, is it 1929 Nash, isn't it, Tammy?
Yeah, so it was lost in 1929. So October 31st, 1929. It had 268 Nash automobiles, give or take. And we were given these numbers by the Wisconsin DNR. They had come across an anomaly on the bottom, and they provided them to State Historical Society. And so we were able to sort of muster a crew to go out there. It was Jay Hansen out of Duluth, and Tom Crossman. That was actually the first time I spent time with Tom Crossman, and Ken Merriman came with us as well. And we went out and looked at these things, and I'd heard actually that Paul Ehorn had lost his ROV looking at the Senator, and I didn't know that this shipwreck was one and the same. In fact, I thought we were looking at something totally different. So because this was in it was in 15 miles out. He was reporting he was 20 miles out. The depth of water was incorrect. I mean, I'm not saying that shipwreck hunters ever misreport their information, but I thought we were on something different. And so when we started seeing the car elevator that had been installed by the Nicholson Universal Transportation Company, I knew we were looking at the Senator. And we started looking around, and there were no cars on the deck at all. And this thing was supposed to have had a full deck load. And so I was telling Ken and all the guys, you know, like we're on the Senator. If they were actually on the Senator, and this is the same shipwreck, watch out for their tether, because their tether's supposed to be down there. And this could be like, you know, could lose 2 ROVs on the same shipwreck. Oh my God. So we didn't know when we were there. We only saw the elevator. So, and that allowed us to identify it definitely as the Senator. So the next year we were able to get Evan Kovacs out, and that's Evan. If you go, the picture you just had up, that's Evan from Marine Imaging Technologies. He had been formerly with Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and then went on his own to do his own development. He's a friend actually from my Monitor days, from USS Monitor. He was my buddy on the Monitor project, and we put it down, and he was not afraid to drop it inside the holds.
Wow.
And so we dropped the ROV inside, kind of routed around a little bit, and we're able to identify that at least inside on the 2 deck levels, down, that there are cars still chained in place. So, and you can see here, this is one of the 1929 automobiles that I'm looking over his shoulder, of course, when he's playing with the video deck here. But that was really exciting. So now the next step is to find where the deck load of cars ended up. So This is Tom Crossman and Tori Galloway, who was our intern last summer when we were working on the Pringle.
Ah, okay.
So, and so it's been that's been an interesting and ongoing project.
I'll say, it's interesting to me. My lost ship of the month a couple months ago was the little steamer Jennifer. And she is right out there within, I would say, a stone's throw of the Senator. And I often wonder, which wreck is which out there, because the Jennifer's obviously a lot smaller than the Senator, but she should be, within spitting distance. But anyway.
When we were given the numbers, that was one of the things that we thought we had was it the Jennifer? Was it the Senator? Could it be the Pierre Marquette? Like that's out there too. So how big is this thing? We weren't given any information on that. Just a screenshot and some GPS coordinates.
Sure, fascinating stuff. So we had a question from a guest, and they wanted you to talk about your diving experiences in the Delaware copper mine up in the copper country, my old stomping ground.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So I had the opportunity to go up and dive the Delaware mine a couple of times, actually. And the landowners and John Jansen John had made the arrangement, and so I was very, very fortunate to be able to have that experience. So I think it was 3 years that we were able to get up there to go diving and explore 4 levels of the mine. The first level is a walking tour, and they have that open for the public and for interpretation. And then there's a little manhole, and you can go through and get access the next layer or the next level of the mine through one of the stopes, and be able to navigate down several different layers of tunnels. So it's absolutely cool place to be. So it's absolutely pristine. There's many layers. I would love to be able to go back and explore that further. So, but yeah, I was very, very fortunate to have that. We were able to set up some experiments too, again, working with Jason Gully from Michigan Tech when he was there, to look at the water chemistry as well, which was pretty interesting. I think that study is reported somewhere as well. So,
was it pretty clear down there in the mine? Was the visibility? It must have been interesting.
Not really. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't great either. As far as probably about 40 foot of visibility. So, and the beautiful thing is that it's very well mapped. So there was a mining engineer that was creating maps of the mine as they were excavating, and so we were able to follow that and really see where we were. So that's a really cool part of my job too, is that we've with the change in funding, that's kind of, all of our funding had been earmarked to Great Lakes projects. And with the opening up of the funding to other submerged archaeological projects, we've been able to look at some of the mines in our state as well.
Very cool.
We've been up in the Baraboo Range and looked at mine there. Been down in Schulzberg area and looked at a lead mine down there. And actually, the one in the Baraboo Range, we nominated to the National Register of Historic Places. It's called the Captain Roberts Mine. And so that passed the State Review Board and has been sent on the National Register. So that would be very cool. This would be the first submerged mine site that was looked at archaeologically, and then submitted also as a National Register of Historic Places. So another first for our state.
Very cool, Tammy. Very neat stuff. So one of the last things I guess I wanted to ask about, and I know this has become a bigger and a bigger issue around the States. And as we watch, the news, we see these articles about these beach wrecks. And it seems to be becoming a thing. It started with the quagga mussels clearing the water up, and all of a sudden, these news stories about all these shipwrecks that are becoming uncovered. And then every time there's a new shipwreck on the beach, there's a great big news story. And a lot of it is over in Michigan. But we have a lot of beach finds all over the lakes, and a lot of these are under the beach. They're not out in the water, but yet a lot of these wrecks are really important. They have a real story to tell, and I'll just name one in particular that's one of my favorites. And I wanted to ask you about policy on this, but there's a wreck off of the Michigan coast, off Little Saville Point. It's the brig Neptune, and it wrecked there in 1839. And we have a lot of evidence that the ship is nearly intact under the sandbar, and very rarely becomes uncovered. The whole bow section will become uncovered, but we think the whole ship is probably under there. And there have to be more like that. What is the state able to do, and do we have any way to catalog such things?
So right now, when there's debris, shipwreck debris that's washed up on the beach, it gets reported to our office, and we record that. So we try to get GPS coordinates. We have a lot of people locally that we work with, try to get them to go out and take some photographs and make sure the GPS coordinates that we've gotten are accurate, and try to keep track of where those things are reported. Because you never know, sometimes when it's just a piece of something that washes up, it may lead you to a larger wreck that's somewhere nearby that you didn't know about. But I sure wish that there was a way holistically around the lakes where we could keep track of all of those beach wrecks. I know that I think we were talking about Pat Labadie.
Yep.
Had initially started a program in Michigan to catalog the beach wrecks, and I sure wish that was something that we all could just kind of jump in and join in and continue to monitor the shorelines, because I do think that there's that is a clue for where things are, and it may end up resulting in a ship being discovered.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was just up on Lake Superior last week, and we had debris on the beach, and we knew what it was. We knew where it was. We'd known there was a wreck there for years, but we didn't know exactly where the bigger wreck was off the shore. And
Sure.
so, a number of us went up there, Randy Beebe and Pete McConnell and Hammermuller. We all kind of went out there and surveyed it. And turns out there's a good chunk of that ship left. It's the Samuel H. Foster, for those of you who were kind of kibitzing around on the news group. I'm still writing it up because it's got a hell of a story. But anyway, that's a good example of debris coming up on the beach. And then, we went out there, and sure enough, there's a good chunk of shipwreck out there.
Yeah. I need to do a better job, I know, here in Wisconsin of getting the message out, not just to maritime aficionados, but to beach walkers, that the shipwreck doesn't lose its value when it washes up on the beach. Like, don't cut it up and make it into a bonfire. We still want to record it, and it's part of a larger archaeological site. So the breaking up of a ship offshore and it drifting ashore is part of that site formation process that happens. So there's still value to it. I was talking to a conservation warden last week about just this very thing. They stumbled across some guys that were removing a shipwreck from the beach. And he called me. He was like, "Is that okay?" I'm like, even if he's a riparian landowner, no, it's not okay. That needs to be reported and recorded, and he can't just burn it. So yeah, so it's like I said, it's this ongoing process. You think you have overcome a hurdle and that everybody's going to love these things and protect these things. And then just these, like these crazy things happen. And then you're back to square one. Wow, I got to do a better job at my job.
Yeah. So Tammy, we've only got a couple of minutes left, but there's an important question somebody asked, and they wanted an update on the proposed National Marine Sanctuary here in Wisconsin. Any update you can give?
We know that it's back at the governor's office, and it's being considered, and he's in very favorable light with it. But where it is in that process, I don't know. Just that it's continuing to be re-examined.
Gotcha. All right. Well, thank you. So we're just about up on the hour here. And Tammy, it's been a really fun conversation, a lot of great information. It was really fun kind of going through some of these wrecks that you and I have both, been really interested in over the years. And I enjoyed getting to know you a little bit better too, and learning a little bit more about your background. I had no idea about most of that. One of the things that really blew me away when we were talking last night, a lot of people don't know this, is that Tammy's grandfather was the founder of college hockey here at UW. An early UW college hockey player and coach. What was his name, Tammy?
Art Thompson. I think I sent you a picture.
You did. You did. I probably have it buried here somewhere, but that really, I'm a hockey player. Everybody who watches the show knows that I'm, I run a hockey league here in Madison. So he's kind of a legend, Art Thompson. I'm like, that's your grandfather? So very cool, Tammy. Anyway, thank you again so much for being on and being my guest on the show. Really enjoyed it. Folks, tune in next week for Dave Trotter. It should be a great show. I'm really looking forward to interviewing Dave. Do help out our friends down in Chicago at the Chicago Maritime Museum if you can. And don't forget, this will be posted on YouTube. I post all the interviews on YouTube afterwards. So if you want to share these outside of the Great Lakes Shipwreck Research Group, you can do that with the YouTube video. And last but not least, we have a Zoom room. I'm going to go get a stiff drink, and then I will launch the Zoom room. So do watch on the group for the link to the Zoom room, and we can go in there and tell tall tales about shipwrecks. I will cut this one off after an hour because last week I may have stayed on a little long and lost track of how many drinks I had. And we'll make sure that doesn't happen again. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Tammy, for a great show. And I'll see you all in the Zoom room. Good night, everybody.
Night.